And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, online at WTKA.com. Sam Webb, Ira Weintraub on the other side of the county, and pleased to be joined by our guy, our legal insider, our WTKA legal expert. You also hear him breaking down Michigan football, the Michigan football breakdown. He is our good friend, Joe Simon, with us for the first time in the new year. So Happy New Year, Joe. How are you, my man?
Good to be with you, Sam, as always. Happy New Year to you. And yeah, with a new year, we have a lot of really incredible legislative reforms that I think listeners are going to be very interested in. So we got new year, new beginnings, and sort of a bad segue into the topic we're going to talk about, opportunities for a clean slate, new beginnings. That's what we do in the new year typically with resolutions.
Right. So we are going to have a sort of all-encompassing segment today where we're going to deal with a lot of some of the legal topics of relevance here in the new year, and then also getting into some football toward the tail end. Before we do that, though, Joe, tell folks about the law offices of Joseph A. Simon.
Sam, you can find us at the michigandefenders.com. We do nothing but criminal defense. And particular to today's topic, part of what we do is we assist people in expungements. An expungement is the setting aside of a criminal conviction. That opportunity historically was much more limited than it's about to be. It's one of the best things that we do, best services that we offer, because it's nice to be able to restore somebody back to a clean slate.
All right. And so if folks want to get in contact with you, Joe, how can they do that?
734-887-6200, 734-887-6200, or the michigandefenders.com. We're right here in Ann Arbor, right across the street from Michigan Football Stadium.
All right. So, novice here, no legal background. I hear expungement. I think that means, okay, I get my, misdemeanor or criminal record. I get an expungement. That means it's disappeared. It's gone. They go to look at my record. They don't see anything about, hey, he was, he had little substance he was smoking on the corner of Stadium in Maine. That's not in there anyway. That's not real. Okay, that didn't really happen. I'm just throwing that out there as a hypothetical. But if it had happened, Joe, and it got expunged, I'm thinking, well, there will be no sign, no signal, no record of that on my record. Is that the proper understanding of expungement?
Well, Sam, I'm going to say yes and no, and I'm going to try to bring up a slideshow to help folks who are watching on Ticket TV. That we see if I do this correctly, and I will try to bring this up and run a show and tell me if that's displaying.
It is.
Great. So an expungement, Sam, you're exactly right. What is an expungement? It does set aside a criminal record or a criminal conviction, pardon me, but does it mean that it's completely obliterated? Not necessarily. So let's talk about the general rule, and this language that people can see on the screen is coming directly from the statute. If a person is granted an expungement, they are considered not to have previously been convicted. Let's stop. That means a person can say honestly, I was not convicted of a crime.
So if you're in a job interview,
correct.
Say you have a criminal conviction, but it's been expunged, you can say, if they say, do you have a criminal record? You can say no.
That's correct, because again, that language, you're considered not to have been previously convicted. There are some exceptions because there are tallies that matter, because the ability for government to be able to find out if you've ever had an expungement before, to find out your true criminal history, there is non-public recording of the occurrence. So how it still exists would generally be true, Sam, as a general statement, for like if you wanted to apply for a government job, like a law enforcement officer or something like that, that history will still be there. Technically, you aren't convicted, but the history is still be able to be seen. And also that would be true for certain enhancement provisions of law. In other words, if somebody's had something set aside, could they still be on, for example, a sex offender registry? Yes. Could they still be on subject to enhanced penalties for having previously been convicted? Yes. But bringing it full circle, it would not be available to the public. You absolutely could say that in a job interview, and that's what it is such a great and important thing to be able to provide to people. The idea is for them to have a clean slate and opportunity.
All right. So an obvious question now is, Joe, all right, so what can I get expunged? I mean, can I get a speeding ticket expunged? Can I get a DUI expunged? I mean, what are the things that can be that are, up for, this possibility for being expunged?
Sam, you always ask great questions. So the first thing I want to say is no, not a civil infraction. That can't be expunged because that's not a criminal conviction. A traffic ticket is a civil infraction. One of the things you mentioned was DUI, and boy, is that a loaded question. This particular legislative reform becomes effective on April 11th of this year, and it has another trigger provision that becomes effective 2 years later in 2023. A late add-on to this package was overwhelmingly passed in the legislature in Michigan and was supported by everyone virtually, and that was to allow one DUI, if you had one DUI, to remove one DUI from your criminal history. That was pocket vetoed by the governor. What does that mean? It shocked a lot of people, particularly me. That means that the governor didn't sign it. That means the governor didn't veto it. She just let it lapse. There was no real explanation for that. That happened over the holiday break. And I am told that is going to be reintroduced as a bill in the new legislature. And I hope that is true, Sam, because it looked like I was going to be able to answer your question. Yes. The other thing I want to talk about on traffic real quick is in the past, all traffic code misdemeanors, all of them were not allowed to be expunged. That means driving while license suspended, leaving the scene of an accident, reckless driving, all of them could never be expunged. For the first time under this new legislation, those things can be expunged. They can be removed from your criminal history. And the only things that are excluded in traffic, as you point out, are DUIs and things that resulted in serious injury or death.
Okay.
So, Sam, I just want to talk about other kind of filter exclusions real quick, and then we'll get into the next topic, is that in the past, you could only have one and only one criminal conviction to seek expungement. Just one. No matter what the nature, misdemeanor, felony, didn't matter. And that around 2011, and then again in 2014, we saw some broadening where the current law, which still exists, is that a person with one felony and up to two misdemeanors can seek to remove the felony or sometimes both misdemeanors. Now we've expanded. Effective in April, as many as 3 qualifying felonies can be removed from a record, and there's no limit for certain misdemeanors, but a limit for 2 assaultive misdemeanors. I'm going to stop because I know that's confusing.
Mm-hmm.
For those who can follow and see on screen, there are things you just can't expunge and you never could expunge, Sam. Things like capital crimes, murder.
Right, because, when you say you can expunge 3 felonies, people are like, well, what the hell? It's not like this blanket thing. You are expunging a murder, right?
That is completely correct. The statute excludes things like murder, armed robbery, capital crimes, things with up to life imprisonment. It excludes criminal sexual conduct cases. There's one minor exception that's not really worth talking about on air right now. Child abuse, accosting minors, child sexually abusive material, felony domestic violence offenses if you have a prior misdemeanor domestic conviction. So these things, if folks are worried that this is almost too much, it isn't. It's carefully crafted legislation But I want to talk about something you also mentioned, Sam, about that activity on Stadium in Maine. One of the special provisions of the new legislation recognizes that we've had changes in laws regarding marijuana offenses. So essentially, and this is boiling it down to a simple statement so folks can follow, if what would now be no crime regarding marijuana offenses, possession of marijuana if you're 21 or over, use of marijuana, possession of drug paraphernalia in certain circumstances, if that would be no crime when you incurred a conviction, not only can you apply, the waiting periods are much different. You may be able to apply immediately, and there's a presumption that that application is going to be granted. In other words, the prosecutor has to come up with compelling reasons to stop it, because all other expungements, the burden is on the applicant to show the judge why there are reasons to grant the privilege.
Okay. And so, as you have on your slide, because I was going to ask you this, I'm sure there's some people, well, when can I go for this? When does this take effect? When can I put this broadening to use?
So there's a difference between when a statute becomes effective and when you can start doing things you need to do. The application filings are to begin the effective date, April 11th, 2021. The marijuana provisions that I just talked about actually say effective January 1st, 2021. And I think those applications can be filed now. But if you meet the criteria that I'm about to describe, the filings will generally begin on April 11th. But as we're going to talk about in a minute, Sam, there are a lot of things that need to be done ahead of time. In other words, people can get moving on this now. So let's talk about that. Here are the general guidelines for requirements for filing. Most of these guidelines stem from the last contact with a court. So the statute speaks of the last day you were discharged from probation or parole, for example. So that would be 3 years from the end of your last contact with the court, essentially, to set aside what we call non-assaultive or non-serious misdemeanors. This is too hard to explain on air. I would recommend folks give us a call or a lawyer they know, because that list of non-assaultive is pretty self-explanatory, but non-serious misdemeanors may surprise folks what's on that list. But if you qualify, it's a 3-year waiting period from your last contact. And Sam, that's an improvement. That is down from what used to be 5 years. Mm-hmm. So folks will find themselves in an ability, if they were told, some time back, oh, you got to wait 5 years after your last contact, you're going to be eligible more quickly, and you may be eligible right away. And then there's 5 years. That's the current waiting period. That's what we usually enjoyed in Michigan, from the end of the last contact, to get rid of a single felony, if you qualify, or one or more serious misdemeanors. And then lastly, Sam, 7 years from the end of last contact to set aside more than one felony.
Okay. All right. So, Joe, we have covered a lot. I'm sure that there are some in the listening or viewing audiences that this would really apply to. And so if they are interested in, in getting more information or contacting you, how can they do it? Because the next question is, all right, what do you need to do? What do you need to do? What do they need to do other than call you? I would think that would be the thing that you'd say they need to do, but is there anything else that needs to be done as well?
Absolutely, Sam. First of all, calling us is the right thing, because we need to make sure that you are qualified, if you go through the filtering process, for expungement A and B when you can do it. Folks can try to do this on their own, but they're going to be entering a field of unknowns, and they may not qualify. And so, but an application, to answer your question directly, needs to be filed with the court in which the conviction occurred. Let me stop. Many people says, well, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, I don't live where I used to live. Do I have to come back there personally? And Sam, this is where we really can help, because we can appear on clients' behalf, And in the COVID era, the courts have really embraced court appearances by video conference. So, but that's one important thing. But you have to get the order of the conviction sought to be set aside. You have to obtain your fingerprints. Now, Sam, this is a funny thing, and when you realize why, it becomes more understandable. The applicant has to prove that they're really the same person, and that they have no other convictions that could disqualify them. So there are things that disqualify you from having the grant of the privilege. One of them can be a continued behavior of criminal conviction. And then you have to provide notice to the other side, Sam, because the people of the state of Michigan have a right to object. For assaultive crimes, victims of the crime have a right to be notified of the application and have a right to have their input considered by the court. And then lastly, scheduling a hearing in court. But Sam, that's what we do. We assist people in preparing the application, making sure that they are qualified to apply, and when they're qualified to apply, we'll assist folks through the entire process about getting the right orders of conviction, directing people on how to get their fingerprints. We file the application properly, where other folks may not be doing the right things because they don't know, with the court and the other side, and we schedule a hearing. But most importantly, Sam, we attend that hearing to talk the right language to the court, to make the right arguments. We will supply legal briefs sometimes, legal documents in support of the request, letters of support, etc.
All right. So if someone wants to get in contact with you, Joe, lay it out for them one more time. How can they reach you?
Sam, the easiest way is our website, themichigandefenders.com. If you click our practice areas, you'll see the expungement tabs, and there are form submissions on our website. You can also call us at 734-887-6200. I've put that contact at the bottom of the slides for people who are able to see this on Ticket TV. You can contact us in any way that you want. We're happy to answer your questions. Many people will want to know, hey, am I eligible, and when am I eligible? We will help you navigate the maze. Most importantly, Sam, is the last thing for people who can see what I'm showing on the slide. All of the things take time. There's a background process that can be started right now, even if you're not eligible to file until April 11th. And just imagine, now that we have expanded opportunity, there's going to be a lot of filings, I suspect, in the state of Michigan come April 11. So we want to try to get the ball rolling essentially now, so that we can get people the earliest opportunity for that set aside.
Gotcha. All right, Joe. I gotta, and I know there are a lot of listeners and viewers that want to get your take on a few things that we've talked about here before. We got into a little bit of a, I don't want to call it a debate, but we put a question to the people based on this video that Joe Milton put up last night, I want to say. Now, you might recall me saying during the year, and certainly leading into the Penn State game, the Penn State game, that you might not see Joe Milton. That and certainly if they had played any game after that there was a chance that you weren't going to see Joe Milton, because they weren't even sure he was going to suit up for that Penn State game because he was injured. They talked about him being injured, and when the season was over, he gets a hand injury, and he had a picture. As a matter of fact, a couple weeks ago, he had a picture of a cast on his hand. People thought it was his left hand. It was reversed. The image was reversed in the mirror. It was his right hand. And, it definitely sort of put in context some things, in perspective some things, because he started wearing this strap on his hand around the Indiana game. They haven't, the nature of his injury hasn't really been released, it hasn't been released. Or revealed, but we do know that he was having some problems gripping the football. And I thought it was really interesting, you telling me off air that you had some, before we get into what the topic was, that you had some similar injury in your athletic background.
So Sam, yeah, when I saw that taping of the hand for the Indiana game, and somebody posted on Twitter, I think, a still picture of it, it looked real familiar to me. And for those who can see me on Ticket TV, I'm going to show you in a minute. This is a speculation on my part, but it looked familiar, and the behavior of the way Joe was throwing was familiar to me too. I think I have the same injury, and I still have it because I never had it attended to. So for those who can see, this is my left hand. I mean, sometimes it's backwards on the screen. This is my right throwing hand. I cannot extend my right thumb as far as my left. And there's a good example of the range of motion. And the reason is my right thumb, I tore actually in high school football, the ligament that goes on the outside of the thumb. And my thumb, therefore, is seated in a different position. It's not in the correct position, and I don't have outside stabilization. The reason that it looked familiar to me is because that ligament injury, you can actually still do most things in life. The things you can't do is you don't have that outside support. So if I, just my own experience, try to take a wide mouth jar and I try to undo the lid, if it's stuck, sometimes my thumb will pull out and extend. It hurts. It's very painful. When I try to bowl, I can't bowl because I can't retain the bowling ball with that outside support. If I try to throw a football, and I have some experience coaching high school football quarterbacks, and they will know this, when I throw a football, when I try to teach, I throw a junior size football. And the reason I throw a junior size football is I can't get my thumb to extend to the full place of full grip on a football. And if I do throw a full size football, invariably, I won't be able to put the pressure on the opposite side sufficiently. My thumb will go out of whack. And here's the thing for Michigan fans, the ball floats. You cannot get the same rotation on the ball. It doesn't have the same authority. And just, it looked familiar to me. And when you said that there was a surgery off season, what I suspect is that the surgery that was proposed to me that I just never did, because my professional quarterbacking career just never went anywhere. So. But is a stabilization. They, instead of, you can't replace a ligament, so they fuse the joint and stabilize it, and they fuse it. And I was saying to you off air, if anyone remembers, Isaiah Thomas had this very same injury.
Yeah, I remember. So for those who weren't around at that time, which I know that there are, don't remember, after the second championship, so the 90-91 season, the Pistons are still rolling. And then Isaiah wound up missing like the second half of the season with a kind of, I guess he broke his wrist he had a really significant hand injury. And so this is the one that you're talking about, right?
He had the same exact ligament injury that I experienced. I talked to the same doctor he spoke to, and he had that fusion. And the reason they say the fusion is fine is you really don't bend that joint very much in life. It's very minor, so the fusion doesn't affect you too much. But what it would do is two things. It would put the thumb back in its proper location, and you can get that range of motion back, but also gives that stability. I was
just real quick, we got a tweet from Zeke, or a message from Zeke, said, I know he broke his wrist, but sounds like he must have had a hand injury in there too.
I know Isaiah I just remember because I talked to the same doctor. His name was Rozier, had that ligament injury too. Could be two separate things, but in any event, so it just looked familiar. That's, how do I know for sure? I don't, but it kind of lines up. It seems consistent with what Joe Milton experienced.
Yeah, again, speculation, but I thought it was a really interesting observation by you, Joe, just based on the the apparatus that people have. I mean, this Michigan sleuthing is on another level, right? They went back and found that he started wearing it in the Indiana game. So, for you to take that and then pair it with, hey, if he's not able to grip the football as well, it sort of reminds you of an injury you had. So it's one of those things where speculation, but it sort of makes sense. That being said, so let's get to the question. So you got a quarterback in Joe Milton coming off of, he has a few starts under his belt. Obviously, he's coming off an injury. You got Cade McNamara with some time under his belt, a start and a lot of snaps, some meaningful snaps under his belt now too, coming off an injury. And so the question for us earlier in the show was, if you're in the portal, I mean, obviously you're looking, your priorities are defensive line, your corner, you got to get those positions. But if a Jack Cohn or a JT Daniels is in the portal, so what are we talking about in that specific instance? Talented quarterback. In those two instances, talented quarterbacks that Michigan recruited and offered, displaced in their situation, not because they, for lack of talent, but because a young upstart, maybe they were injured, a young upstart comes in and they are and plays well, and they're going to stick with that guy. Therefore, displacing those veteran guys with a lot of starts and success under their belts. I felt like Michigan last year, when JT Daniels came up, it's like, man, that's a guy that you got to explore, because you don't have that kind of experience in your room. I feel the same way this year, Joe, that if it's Jack Cohn, who's off the board now, he's going to Notre Dame, or someone similar, I absolutely would entertain the idea of bringing him in, understanding that if I go that route, Joe, it has to be for a guy who I think could beat out the guys that I have. You can't do it for depth. Can't do it just to have another body. It has to be a guy who you think could come, in my opinion, who you think could come in and be better than the guys you have. If there's a guy like that with experience under his belt, I'm looking at it, but it sounds like you disagree.
Sam, the last thing you said illustrates the problem. I don't flat out disagree, but I come close. Because the message received from everyone, not only in the quarterback room, but in the locker room, will be that no one will be brought in unless he's expected to be a starter. That is the problem. See, you don't just want the best players. You also want to be able to get the best out of the players you have. For me, I have always focused all last season, we talked about this, that I believe the problems were attributable to the locker room. I focused on things like lack of trust. If you bring in a transfer quarterback, Sam, and we hear the mantra that everyone thinks is really here to be a starter, oh, it's going to be an open competition, whoever's the best person. Players don't buy that, Sam, because you won't buy it, I won't buy it. That's the kind of thing that can filter and infect a locker room. Here's why I don't say flat no. If it's really true that Joe Milton's likely on his way out of here, if it's really true that that's potentially true for Cade McNamara too, then you have to protect the program.
Well, so I think certainly there was a lot of speculation about Joe coming off of last season with with the emergence of Cade late. But now both of those guys, got to be thinking about the other guys coming off an injury. They're both coming off injuries now. And Joe, I'm sure they feel like internally was impact. Not all of his struggles can be attributable to his injury, but some of them certainly can be. And so I think that, I think that the assessment of his future, at least internally, isn't what fans. He hasn't been damned to purgatory as a starting quarterback in the eyes of Michigan like he has some fans. So I could see how both of those guys, especially looking at the other and the fact that he's coming off injury, could feel like, hey, you know what? I can come back, I can compete, and I can still win this job. So I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion that Joe goes. I think there is reason to be to be cautious of, to be leery of the possibility.
I agree with that.
That being the case, Joe, I'm still of the mind that even with that, what do you have between the two? 6 starts? I certainly think that there is potential in both. I am not done believing in the idea that both of these guys could grow into successful starting quarterbacks. But on balance, if you told me if Jack Cohn's out there and you told me I could go get Jack Cohn, he's not out there anymore. He's going to Notre Dame. I would have taken him. I
Two
would have
things, Sam. Two things. How did we get to the place of only 6 starts? We got there through this kind of a carousel, and lack of development of a quarterback. This is really important to me. Is not just attributable to lack of ability or X's and O's or the right coaching position coach for quarterbacks. The lack of development is going to the broader thing that I'm talking about. Why players will come here, and can they trust and embrace the program and the development along? See, I believe that that kind of thing infects a locker room far beyond one position group. And I personally believe that's the issue we've had.
Yeah, it's you're making a forest for the trees argument, which I think in most instances is the way to is the view to have. But to me, the why you're here in this year is not as important as the fact that you're here. Where you are right now, you need the best possible option. The guy who you think gives you the best chance to win, regardless of how he got to you, is who you need there right now. Now that might, again, you don't look at the portal unless you think that guy is absolutely better than the options that you have here right now for the reason that you laid out, because it will impact your room, Joe. But unless you told me it was going to impact JJ McCarthy, which I know for a fact it won't. I know this is a conversation I had with his dad, not me asking him about a transfer quarterback. I say, hey man, is JJ, is he, he's going in there early. Is he, he's gonna be he's competing to be in the mix for the starting job as a true freshman. Is he ready for that? Based on what you've seen from him in the past, because he certainly seems like that to me, Joe. And Dad said, yeah, he's going in there with that mindset. But you know what? If he loses it to Joe, or if he loses it to Cade, or if they go get a transfer quarterback, this is Dad talking, then he's going to be the best clipboard guy you've ever seen, because he knows that there's a lot for him to learn, and he's ready to learn from the sideline if that is what the competition dictates. So it won't affect him. So that's why I'm saying, give me what gives me the best chance to win right now, even if that means that guy's in the portal. I don't know if he is. I'm just saying I wouldn't turn my nose up to it.
Sam, I don't think I turn my nose up at anything right now, so I'm not really there. That's why I said it's not a flat no for me. And I am going to concede what you said prior to my segment about the reality of the state of the game today, and understanding what the transfer portal is, and understanding the reality of how it affects the game. Totally concede that point. Totally agree. But what I don't like is, hey, this Joe Burrow came in and all of a sudden LSU was a national champion. So, I don't care what someone's ability is on paper. They have to play within a team. They have to play within a locker room. They have to have 10 other guys around them that are going to support them and buy in and trust in the program. It is wrongful thinking, even in this modern era, that 18 to 21-year-old kids, and I call them kids, young adults, let's say, are not affected by those things. This is maybe becoming more like a semi-pro league. That makes me sad, but that's our reality. But it doesn't mean that those things still don't exist. It's going to be a very delicate balance. And you're right about the immediate need to win, but that goes to another topic. That kind of goes to the contract issue and the desperation of maybe perform now or else kind of mentality. That also adds another dynamic. So if you had somebody who was the world beater quarterback on paper and brought him in the transfer portal, I think it's just wrongful, naive thinking for people to say, that means we're going to get superior quarterback play and we're going to have a world beater success on offense. Don't believe that. Never have.
Yeah, I think there's no substitute for experience, and we got to get used to, if you have a hole on your team, You feel it like teams in the NFL feel it in free agency. And coaches have to be able to adapt to how you manage a locker room with
You're right.
with a more fluid roster. You know, that's gonna be another coaching element. I'm not discounting what you say, that you gotta be mindful of that too, about how, you know, the turnover in your locker room, especially at that position, could be, you know, impactful as far as the, you know, the harmony and the leadership in that room. I get that, but again, no substitute for experience, and I would not remove myself from that equation if there was a guy out there like that, and I don't know that there is anymore. You know, Jack Cohn's not there anymore. So
Sam, I agree. This is why I started by saying it's not a flat no for me, and I am really going to concede your last point there about not only is this our new reality, but it's going to require an adaptation in coaching, and you know, it's, although the season is not, you know, not even at its midway point, I think we're seeing a great example of this with Juwan Howard and the basketball team. I think we're seeing a great example of how that can be done and still have all players on the roster buying in and embracing. And, you know, I think that's the thing we all like so much. It's not just that they're successful. It's just what, heck, half of that last game, Sam, I was more interested in watching the player reaction on the sideline than
right.
Yeah.
But you know what? I think what you just laid out is a great illustration of what coaches are going to have to be able to do across the board, you know, to be able to infuse regularly new guys, veteran guys into the equation, veteran guys that come into the equation with expectations. Because you said, hey, quarterback is going to come in. He's going to come in here expecting to start. I'm sure Shawnee Brown, when he signed on, was like, I'm about to go to the NBA. I'm coming in here to get some, you know, some starters minutes and you know, certain number of shots, kind of thing. But Juwan has been able to manage the expectations and get every guy to buy into the team concept and have them believe that through the accomplishment of we, you know, every me in here is still going to be successful. So great job by Juwan, but great job by you, Joe. Before you go, we got to come back around, tell folks about the law offices of Joseph A. Simon, and tell them how they can get in contact with you.
TheMichiganDefenders.com, TheMichiganDefenders.com, 734-887-6200. You can find us right across the street from Michigan Football Stadium. It's always great to be able to talk legal stuff and some football stuff too, Sam, with all of you. I also want to say the governor signed something else, which is called name, image, and likeness, that becomes effective at the end of 2022. That will be, talk about a new era, talk about an impact on how players come to the University of Michigan. That's a discussion I look forward to having too.
I do too. I look forward to all our discussions, Joe. We always have a great back and forth, man. Thanks a lot. Happy New Year.
You too. Stay healthy, you guys.
All right. We need to get to a break. We'll be back on the other side here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, The Ticket.